About edible fungi as an alternative protein. Oh, I have some koiro on this too. Keep thinking about their breast milk when they're fungi.
Thank you. Really thanks to Manu for inviting me to come here, and it's wonderful to receive a great welcome and the opportunity to be here. I want to change tack a bit because right up till now you've only been talking about two kingdoms of life. The animal kingdom that we're part of and the plant kingdom. But there's another kingdom, and that's the kingdom I want to mention now. It's the fungal kingdom. And you might think the fungal kingdom is some small little way out kingdom. Well, if I told you it was bigger than the plant kingdom, not quite as big as the animal kingdom, it's a huge kingdom that most people know very little about. I'm from Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, and nicely we've got a little fungus mushroom, a very iconic New Zealand mushroom, as one of our logos for our Land, Our Future. We're one of the Crown Research Institutes. If you don't know of us, we've been around for 25 years, so we've kept our light under a bushel quite a lot. But we've also just rebranded to put Manaaki Whenua first rather than second, and trying to get our message out there a bit. So my subject is fungi. I've worked on fungi for many years, and I work in a group of 10 people who work on the fungi of New Zealand. All different aspects of it, from what fungi do we have in New Zealand to what can we do with them. How can we conserve them if they are rare? How can we get rid of them if they are invasive? So maybe fungi could be one of the mix of considerations for an alternative protein source amongst the plants, amongst the animals. So just a bit of introduction, because I think for many of you fungi are a bit of a mysterious group of organisms. They certainly were for me when I was growing up in education, where my teachers told me they were a kind of plant. We're nothing like a plant. They're closer to an animal than they are to a plant. So a little bit of basic biology, just with the mushrooms, for example. So you've got the mushroom here, or rapihu. I've just done a resource for Kurakaupapa. And the mushroom typically has, on the underside of the cap, these gills, pia, and on the gills are a series of cells called basidia, from which the pua'atua or spores are produced. So the spores are the actual agents of dispersal of fungi, and the mushroom that you see there has arisen from, in this case, a piece of wood. Inside that wood, the actual fungal feeding stage exists. That's the Tairāwhiti or high feed. That is living in the wood, getting its food from the wood, and we see the result because the wood decays. That's what wood rot is all about, fungi feeding on wood. That same fungus, or the hyphae there, can be also grown in the laboratory on a nutrient medium, and we do that all the time, very routinely. And a typical mushroom life cycle. So the spores are produced, the spores land somewhere that might be suitable for germination, and this part's greatly enlarged. You get germination, you get growth of hyphae. Many fungi are sexual beings. They need to actually mate to then be able to produce another mushroom again. And here's a young mushroom developing and maturing there. So just some basic biology. There are many, many different kinds of fungi and many different kinds of life cycles, but for the mushroom, one of these mushrooms, that's the typical way to go. Different parts of the mushroom I've already mentioned, and the fact that we can grow it as a living organism in culture. We have a National Culture Collection in Manaaki Whenua. We've got 10,000 living strains of fungi of New Zealand, mostly of New Zealand. They're living in liquid nitrogen at minus 296 degrees Celsius, and it's a national collection for all sorts of any purpose that you might have for fungi. Looking at the biodiversity of New Zealand, and what do we know about what we have in New Zealand? This large sector of the pie here is all of the animals in terms of number of species. You've got a small section here of bacteria, protozoa, chromists that are a bit, well, another small group. And then you've got these two groups that are equal size, the plants and the fungi. The number of plants and the number of fungi known in New Zealand is about equal, just over 7,000 species. But the plants are mostly known and the fungi are barely known. We think there are about 3 times that number of fungi, possibly 15,000 species of fungi yet to be found in New Zealand, if we are similar to other countries where fungi are well known. So we set ourselves a task, and that was to see if we could work with students and ask the question, could they find a new fungus? Is it that easy? One of the schools we worked with is the Kurakaupapa Kaikoe. These are the students here. You can see them doing some work. We showed them how you might look for a fungus, how you might discriminate whether it's new or not, what tests to use. What they found was not a large fungus, they found a very small one. And this is the scientific paper that we wrote with them to describe the new fungus that they found. It's a new yeast. Let's just go back, sorry. Here are the names of the students. So this is an unusual scientific paper. Many scientific papers you might, if you're not a scientist, you might sort of not even want to pick up. This one is a 2-page scientific paper. Page 1 is a picture, and it contains the picture relevant to the organism that's being described. And so here's the students, this is the forest just near Kaikoe that we went looking for a new fungus. This is the fungus here. They're single cells, they're yeasts. The genus is Rhodotorula. We were able to tell the students that. This is the student names of the students in the class. This is a description of the organism, published as science needs to be done in a special way. Here's the evolutionary tree showing the relationships of this fungus with other related fungi. And the students chose the name of the fungus. The name of the fungus is Nohi Nohi. And that came from the school motto. So we basically took them through the process of discriminating something new to science. They gave it a name, we helped them publish it. So it's quite neat as scientists to actually work with students and show them the process of what we do, which is to discover new biodiversity in New Zealand. Okay, so looking at fungi then. 3 kinds of products that we are interested in, and these are not things that have been developed, these are things that may have potential to be developed. So I'm putting it out there for any interest, and we are going presently for funding in conjunction with colleagues in Callaghan Innovation, Hikarangi Enterprises as well, to look at these things. So mycoprotein, myco short for fungus, so fungal protein or bioactives or edible fruiting bodies. I've just published this Ngā Heka Heka o Aotearoa, and Heka Heka is, we think, probably the best name for fungi in Māori. And that was in discussions with Henry Jacob, as a word that may not cover fungi quite in the sense that I use it in a science sense, but we think it's the best word that exists. And there's some five species of fungi which I will briefly introduce you to. But before that, just to mention some of the advantages that growing fungi might have. They don't use much land, they don't need fertile soils, they don't need light, they are rather low on pollution. What else? Growing them isn't necessarily very easy. It's certainly an art and a science together, so don't think it's simple, but it certainly requires a fairly well-developed skill set. It could use waste products. I was interested in Sedenko with the waste that is produced. Maybe fungi could be part of that solution. They do produce CO2, so unlike plants, you can say they're not good because they produce CO2, but that's to be taken into account. And these mycoproteins, bioactives and edible mushrooms actually span a range of different sort of levels of industrialisation through to potentially whānau scale development. So looking quickly at the 5 species of fungi that are or were known to Māori. As I started this project, I had a master's student who did a lot of interviews of Māori to find out what was the knowledge known of ancestral use of fungi. And there didn't seem to be very much known. So part of the reason for doing what I've done, which is to try to put this back into kura kaupapa, to actually give the students this knowledge again, because it seems to have been partially lost in the actual learning from parent to child. So Harare, I think, was one of the very common species that was harvested, and some of you will know it as a mushroom which occurs during winter on tawa and certain other woods in the forest. It's a good edible species, but interestingly I've put these pictures here just to show you that it also does something unusual. Very few native fungi are of any consequence in terms of plant diseases, but this particular one happens to damage kiwi fruit and pines in certain circumstances. So this was the early kiwi fruit orchards back in the 70s, and those bare areas are where this fungus has killed kiwi fruit, either side of shelter belts. The shelter belts were felled after they had done their job of preventing wind damage of young kiwi fruit vines. But when they were felled, the stumps were left in the ground. And this fungus was able to colonise those stumps and grow out through the dead roots of the willows or whatever they were using as their shelter belt species, and kill the kiwi fruit either side of the shelter belt. The whole practice changed as a result, and now the stumps are ground into the ground, or it's artificial shelter that's used. Also, pine trees, if they're grown on where native forest has been felled, then they can be vulnerable to damage because this fungus also lives in the soil. This fungus has another special property, which from a Western sense anyway was only discovered a year ago. In the young stage, it's luminescent. This was discovered not by one of our people in our institute, but by an American photographer friend of ours who gets up at 2 o'clock in the morning and goes looking for luminescent fungi. Pretty special. When it gets older, it doesn't do that. Next one, Tairāwhiti. This is a really elegant mushroom. Occurs on a range of native trees, but always on living trees, not dead wood, but living trees. So in some ways it's parasitic, but not to the point of damaging or killing the tree. You can always tell it because it's got a skirt hanging down underneath of this stalk, and it's brown. It's another good edible species. Related ones to this are cultivated overseas. How about this one? A number of names that have been given to this. You know it's smelly? Yeah. Do you know why it's smelly?
Fly pollinated.
Yeah, well, it's not so much fly pollinated, but certainly fly dispersed. Yeah, it's designed, it stinks. It's one of the stinkhorn fungi, and it needs to actually attract flies because that's how it spreads its spores. They're not wind dispersed, they're fly dispersed. So you'll possibly smell it before you see it. This was eaten, can you eat it? You eat it in the early stage. The records show that Maori used to eat this, the outer skin of it, in the young stage, because it starts out as an egg. So in the egg stage, it was edible. Yeah. It was also the subject of a lovely children's climbing frame in Hagley Park in Christchurch. Sadly, that's no more. It got vandalised, but at least I had a photo of it before it disappeared. There are wonderful, wonderful shapes, and how do they develop like that? It's amazing. Tairāwhiti, which is a pretty, maybe this is one you do know, a woodier fungus in English, and quite common on all sorts of dead wood, even in the home garden, sometimes even on tamarillo and apple and all sorts. But it was the only fungus in New Zealand that's ever been a subject of an export trade. This was so-called the fungus trade, which occurred in about 1870 to 1910, and it was based in Tairāwhiti, and a Chinese businessman called Chu Chong set this up, and a lot of Maori were collecting this fungus on land that was being broken in from forest to farms, and it was collected and sent in huge quantities and hundreds of tons of dry weight to China as a food. Today, we import it from China, because it's cultivated there. It's edible. All of these are rare. These are all edible species. And finally, Tairāwhiti. This is a wonderful mushroom. It's otherwise known as fungus icicles, And it's like a series of hanging teeth. It's related to another mushroom in Asia, which is cultivated in large quantities. And a particularly interesting one, only found in New Zealand on well-decayed wood. So old-growth forest is normally the only place we find this one. So those are 5 species known to ancestral Maori, none of them exploited in New Zealand in any way, potentially adaptable for cultivation, potentially of use for extraction of bioactives if researched, potentially a source of mycoprotein if some processing can be arranged for it. Just finishing off to say that this publication was released just this month and it's being launched on Monday. It's a resource for students throughout the Kurokaukaua schools. It's been sent 30 copies to 108 schools and the teacher guide as well. It lists a range of fungi for not just edibility but other uses that Maori had for fungi, including fire carrying, the pigment for tattooing, etc., etc. And finishing off with just a little couple of quick slides on fungal cultivation. So these particular fungi would be grown on sawdust, and here I was recently in Vietnam. The sawdust process there is where sawdust is put into bags, and the bags are basically sterilised, and the fungus is then put into the sterile sawdust to grow, and conditions manipulated such that you get it fruiting, producing its fruit body. These are mushroom houses of some number. And this is the sort of product that you get. These are different kinds of edible mushrooms. This one more medicinal than edible. So that sort of, it can be at various cottage scale, funhouse scale, whatever. And the mycoprotein is this product that's presently an example, the only example, in fact, of a fungal protein that's sold internationally. This is in our supermarkets in the frozen section, basically. And it's got its nutrients, amino acid complement, somewhat similar to vegetables, and has a high, low total fats, etc. So it's a meat substitute food, and maybe there are other fungi that could also fit into this category. And we're just about finished with. Have to have something very, very, very in New Zealand. The $50 banknote, if you haven't seen it, you should have a second look at it. And this is a Tūhoe story, because the kokako has a blue wattle on its cheek, and the Tūhoe story is that it rubs its cheek against the Entaloma blue mushroom to get that, and that's the story the Reserve Bank put on it. The old note used to be, have it down here, and I wrote to the Reserve Bank and said, when you're redesigning this note, make sure you don't lose it off the edge of the note. And so it got put there, and they thought I'd be happy, and I am. And a set of stamps that was released a few years ago with Fungi of New Zealand. And I finish off with this, where I've just extended our logo from our land, our future to our land, our future.